If you've ever felt like the night is watching you, like behind the still curtains and quiet walls, something ancient waits with a patient breath, you're not wrong. For there is a place the stars refuse to shine upon, a place just beyond sleep, where time sinks into velvet silence and forgotten gods still hum lullabies into the folds of eternity. And if you let your breathing slow, if you let your body surrender to the gravity of drowsiness, I'll take you there, to the edge of the endless realm known in only the oldest tongues as Somnara, the city of the slumbering deep. And as your limbs grow heavier and your thoughts loosen their grip on the day, you'll find yourself walking barefoot down a soft path of moss and stardust, where the trees lean close like storytellers, and the moon overhead seems not to shine, but to listen. In Somnara, sleep is not a state but a place, a vast, ancient dream stretching deeper than oceans and older than time itself. And it is there that a girl named Eliara wandered one mist-laced night, her heart heavy with unspoken sadness, and her eyes luminous with the kind of yearning only those who've watched shooting stars alone can truly understand. For Eliara was no ordinary dreamer. She was born of dusk and lullaby, her mother a night moth that drank only the dew of sleep-blessed blossoms, and her father a silent poet who wrote verses in the steam of morning windows. And though her village saw her as strange, she bore her loneliness quietly, drifting through her days half awake and her nights fully alive, in dreams that felt more real than the waking world. And so it was, on a night when the wind whispered secrets to no one in particular, that Eliara slipped from her bed, guided not by logic, but by the gentle pull in her chest, the kind of magnetic hush that only the dream-born can feel. And she wandered through the fields beyond her home, where moonflowers bloomed wide as eyes, and the air smelled of lavender and forgotten songs, until she reached a hill that had no name, though elders warned it should never be climbed after dusk, for it was said to vanish under certain moons and lead to places the waking should never tread. But Eliara, drawn by something she couldn't name, ascended it slowly, each step muffled by dream mist curling at her feet. And as she reached the crest, the stars above blinked out all at once, not with fear, but with reverence. And she stood at the edge of a ripple in the world, a tear in the veil of real and unreal. And there before her lay the gates of Somnara, towering and silent, carved from moonstone and bone, with symbols that pulsed gently like breath. And though they had not opened in 1,000 years, they parted for her with a sigh, as if the city itself had been waiting for her return. For Eliara, though she did not know it, had walked those streets before, in lifetimes forgotten, in dreams that shaped worlds, and the city welcomed her with soft lights and endless paths, its buildings humming with memories, and its skies woven with drifting tapestries of stars that weren't stars but sleeping spirits, watching her gently as she stepped into the dream realm that lives only in the space between waking and forgetting. The streets of Somnara wound like lullabies, turning not where stone would command, but where story would flow. And as Eliara wandered them, she felt the presence of lives long past, brushing against her skin like moth wings. Faces that smiled from windows, glowing orbs that whispered riddles into the wind, fountains that sang in voices no tongue could name. And with each step, she felt her heartbeat slowing, her body growing lighter, her thoughts dissolving like sugar in warm tea. And soon she found herself at the center of the city, where a great tree grew upside down, its roots in the sky and its leaves stroking the cobbled earth like fingers. And beneath it sat an old woman whose eyes were closed, but who still saw everything. And she beckoned Eliara without speech, for in Somnara, words were luxuries too loud for such quiet beauty. And as Eliara sat, the woman reached into her robes and drew out a vial filled with a glowing silver mist, the distilled breath of the first sleeper to ever dream. And when she uncorked it, the air shifted, the city held its breath, and Eliara felt her past lives return in a wave of soft ache and distant joy. Memories of times she was a wind chime in a temple where no one prayed, a melody hummed by a child who lived only in memory, a tear on the cheek of the moon. And she remembered why she had come, not to escape her loneliness, but to remember that she was not alone, had never been alone, that the ache she felt was a calling, a whisper from the deepest part of sleep, reminding her that some hearts are too vast for one life to hold. And the old woman placed the vial in her hand, closing her fingers around it with a smile that meant farewell, and beginning all at once. And without knowing how, Eliara stood. And so, as the silver mist beneath Eliara's pillow swirled in slow spirals, like breath itself dreaming, the city of Somnara pulsed softly beyond the veil once more, waiting not with urgency, but with eternal patience. For the children of dreams do not return by force, but by resonance. And in the depth of Eliara's slumber, something within her answered. Not a thought, not a word, but a pull, a hush, like velvet fingertips brushing across her heart. And just as the moon turned its secret face toward the earth, her soul slipped loose from her body like a note leaving a harp, weightless, luminous, and full of ancient familiarity. And once again she stood at the crest of the nameless hill, the gates of Somnara before her. Only this time they did not open with sighs, but with silence, a deeper kind of welcome, one that knows you are not a guest anymore, but home. And as she stepped through, the city shimmered in soft reconfiguration. For in Somnara, nothing remains unchanged. Not the streets, not the skies, not the dreams that wander through it. And what had once been lantern-lit alleys and fountains that sang now spiraled into open courtyards, with petals drifting in invisible breezes, and buildings that slowly breathed in and out as though asleep themselves, their stones sighing in rhythms older than words. The air was warmer this time, not in temperature, but in memory. And as she walked, Eliara noticed that she was not alone. Other figures moved through the city now, slowly, reverently, their outlines soft as candle flame, some with faces, some faceless, all with stories she could almost remember, like lyrics from lullabies sung long ago by voices she had loved but forgotten. And one such figure approached her, tall and robed in violet hues that shimmered like twilight on water, its hands cupped around a glowing orb that pulsed not with light, but with feeling, longing, sorrow, joy, the whole ache of existence wrapped in radiance. And though it spoke no words, Eliara understood its offer, to guide her deeper into Somnara, beyond the waking edge of dream, into the realms where even sleep sleeps. And she nodded, her breath steady, her bare feet ready, and followed the figure through a gate of hanging vines that opened onto a spiral staircase, descending into shadowlight, where each step echoed not with sound, but with memory, flashes of other lives blooming around her like smoke, her hands shaping clay in an ancient village, her laughter ringing from the edge of a floating island, her tears falling into the sea as a dragon died in her arms. And the deeper she descended, the more those echoes merged, folding into her, not as memories but as truths, identities she wore as simply as breath, until finally the stairs gave way to an enormous cavern lit from below by a lake of slumber itself, still and silver and endless. And here the robed guide knelt and placed the orb into the waters, which rippled once and stilled, and a bridge of floating lotus petals unfolded across it, inviting Eliara forward. And with each step, the petals whispered secrets. You have always been here. Every breath is a door. There is no end, only gentler beginnings. Until she reached the heart of the lake, where a platform of woven star silk held a single bed, simple and ancient, carved from driftwood and bone, its pillow stuffed with cloud stuff, and beside it stood a mirror, but not one that showed her face. It showed her fears, her forgotten sorrows, the weight she still carried from a world that never truly understood her. And as she gazed, a tear slipped from her sleeping self's eye, a tear that shimmered, floated, and drifted upward into the mirror, which absorbed it like thirst meeting water, and the reflection changed, revealing her not broken, not whole, but real, honest, and sacred. And the bed beckoned her not to sleep, but to dream forward, to shape the dreamscape itself. And so, Eliara lay down, and the city beneath the lake bloomed into existence around her. Yes, for there was a second Somnara, hidden beneath the first, built from the shared dreams of all who had ever passed through its gates. And here buildings floated like ships through skies that changed color with thought, where bridges led not to places but to memories, where libraries held not books but sleeping cats who purred entire histories into your ears if you listened close enough. And Eliara stood in the center of this inner sanctum, the dream of a dream, and felt not overwhelmed, but in tune, as if every pulse of this realm mirrored the beat of her own quiet, courageous heart. And slowly, gently, dreamers began to gather. Other souls who had wandered through sleep and stumbled upon this hidden city, drawn by their own ache for meaning, their own yearning for peace. And together they shaped the architecture of shared comfort, towers that hummed lullabies for the lost, hammocks woven from memories of laughter, gardens of soft lights that bloomed when someone smiled. And as the essence of Eliara drifted deeper into the folds of the deep slumbering, beyond even the glimmering dream layers of Somnara, the nothingness around her was not void, but fullness before form, a vast cradle of unborn dreams, where silence sang with the weight of all that could ever be, where color had not yet chosen a name, and time curled upon itself like a sleeping serpent. And in that place, she did not float, nor fall, nor walk, but existed in the most profound stillness, a stillness that was not absence but sacred preparation, as though the cosmos itself held its breath in reverence for what would soon unfold. And within her there stirred something ancient, something not hers, but part of her, a memory seeded in the soil of all sleeping things. And from that seed grew a vision not seen with eyes, but felt in the bones of her soul. A corridor of stars winding through shadow and whisper, doors lined on either side, each glowing with a softness that pulsed in tune with forgotten lullabies. And as she drifted closer, a single door responded, blooming open like a flower to reveal a realm unlike the others. Darker, not in menace, but in mystery, a place where the deep magic slumbered, the first dream, older even than the name of Somnara. And as she entered, she found herself standing on the surface of a sea that reflected nothing, a mirror to no world, a canvas of pure potential, and above her loomed a tree, immense and alive, its roots plunged not into soil but into memory. Its branches hung heavy with dreams unclaimed, each one trembling like a drop of dew. And there, waiting beneath its boughs, was a creature unlike any she had known, neither beast nor spirit, but something between, shaped like the wind and woven from shadow, with eyes that blinked in constellations, and it bowed its horned head to her and spoke without mouth or voice, only through understanding. "You are the threadwalker now," it said. And in that moment, 1,000 threads rose from the sea beneath her feet, brushing her fingertips, humming with voices from other dreamers scattered across time, some who had just fallen asleep, others who had dreamed themselves into exile, all unknowingly connected by Eliara's steps. And she understood then that her path was no longer only hers, for she had become a conduit, a passage through which others might find the peace and the purpose hidden in their slumber. And with that knowledge came shape. The sea formed paths, the air birthed constellations in the shape of doors, and her limbs returned not as flesh, but as luminous threads wrapped around intention. And as she took her first step as threadwalker, the tree shivered and released a single fruit, a globe of pure sleep, glowing dimly, cradling inside it the echo of a new dream ready to be planted. And she took it, pressed it to her heart, and was pulled forward by the threads into the dreams of another. A child trembling alone in the ruins of a forgotten kingdom, curled beneath broken stars, her breath shallow with fear of the night. And as Eliara entered that space, she did not speak, but laid beside the child in silence, letting warmth radiate from her presence. And slowly, the stars above began to pulse again, whole and remembered. And when the child opened her eyes, she saw not ruin, but a field of fireflies. And in that light she slept, truly slept, for the first time in many moons. And Eliara faded from her side, leaving behind a flower that bloomed only in dreamlight. And so the thread pulled her again, to a sailor drowning in seas made of regret, thrashing in storm thoughts that wrapped around him like kelp of sorrow. And as she touched the water, it calmed, stilled, and lifted him into a sky he had forgotten. And when he awoke, he wept not with grief, but with release. And from each dream she visited, each thread she walked, she gathered fragments of courage, of loss, of laughter, of stillness, and wove them into the cloak that now flowed behind her. A tapestry of stories not hers, yet part of her. And the more she gathered, the more the deep slumbering unfolded around her, revealing layers of realms nested within each other like endless lullabies. Until one night, or perhaps no night at all, she came to a thread unlike the others. It shimmered differently, pulsed with both dread and yearning. And when she touched it, it trembled with a sound like a name being forgotten. And she followed it, only to find herself before a door that resisted her presence, veined with vines that whispered doubts. And behind it, a dreamer not merely lost, but hiding, afraid not of monsters but of memory. And she knew she could not enter unless welcomed. So she knelt beside the door, cloak wrapped around her like a cocoon, and waited, not for hours or days, but for belief. And eventually the door cracked open, and within was a mirror world, one that had turned upon itself, where the dreamer had built prisons of illusions to keep themselves from pain. And so, as Eliara stood once more beneath the immense dreaming tree, whose branches had stretched even further across the ethereal sky of the deep slumbering. She beheld how each fruit upon its limbs now pulsed like soft lanterns of forgotten lullabies, and she felt them calling, one after another, in tones so subtle and layered that even silence itself bent its head in reverence. For these were not just dreams waiting to be walked, but echoes of souls on the edge of unraveling, waiting for a quiet hand to reach in and remind them of the comfort they had once known. And in that moment, a single thread brighter than all others lit itself across the dream current, a silver river snaking through time's folded cloth. And as Eliara reached to touch it, her fingertips were immediately pulled into its rhythm. And without transition, without sound, she stood upon a vast field of forgotten birthdays, where memories rose from the ground like candles on invisible cakes, flickering with hopes no one remembered wishing. And standing at the center was a man with no shadow, hands buried in his coat pockets, eyes staring into nothing. For he had not slept in decades, not truly, not peacefully, and his dreams, long unvisited, had turned to cracked ground and dusty winds. Yet within him flickered a child's music box, its song still trying to play beneath all the noise. And Eliara knelt beside the fractured soil and gently pressed her hand into the center of the dream. And the music box began to unwind again, note by trembling note, until the air hummed with the lullaby he had heard as a child, but never remembered where from. And as his head turned slowly toward her, his shadow returned, stretching behind him like a tail that had finally come home. And for the first time, tears fell from his eyes, not from pain, but from the weight of recognition that someone had come, that someone had heard the quiet weeping in the corner of his soul and answered. And as he lay down, right there in that dream field of old hopes, the candles began to relight themselves, one by one, and the ground softened into grass, and the sky turned the color of old storybooks. And when Eliara rose, the man had become a child again in his sleep, a boy curled under a quilt of imagined constellations. And she left behind a stuffed fox at his side, one she had shaped from dream thread and her own quiet memory. And then the thread pulled her onward again, onward and inward, into a dream tangled by fear so thick it bled through time. An old woman dreaming alone in a cabin of cracked windows and ticking clocks, each talk louder than the last, and around her danced shadows of regrets. Roads not taken, words not spoken, love not dared. And Eliara entered gently, not touching anything at first, simply sitting beside the fire that did not warm, letting her presence unravel the false cold. And as the clock slowed, as the shadows curled back into the corners from which they came, the woman reached toward the girl she had once been, the one hiding beneath the floorboards of her own dream, and embraced her. And the warmth returned, not from fire, but from the glow of release. And as Eliara stepped outside the cabin into the dreamwood, the trees bent low in gratitude, as if bowing to the unseen service rendered, and the threads gathered again, knotting themselves into a ribbon around her wrist, as if the dreamers themselves wished to stay near her, to thank her not with words but with nearness. And Eliara walked on, not because she had to, but because she could not stop, not while there were threads still untended, still curled in upon themselves like frightened animals. And so the path brought her to a lake made of whispers, its surface soft and ever shifting, where she met a girl who would not speak, not even in dream, for her voice had been locked away by years of noise and judgment in the waking world. But in the hush of that dream water, Eliara spoke without words, through shared reflection and the music of stillness. And in time, the girl opened her mouth, and birds flew out. Not real birds, but dream birds, each one carrying a song she had once sung only to herself. And they filled the sky with color, returning the sun to the silent lake. And the girl laughed, truly laughed. And the dream reshaped itself into a meadow of letters, stories written in petals. And Eliara left behind a notebook bound with moonlight for her to fill. And again she was pulled forward, this time into a labyrinth of glass, where a young man ran endlessly, chased not by monsters, but by mirrors of who he feared he might become. And Eliara did not chase him, did not speak, but became a breeze, a soft wind that nudged open the only mirror he dared not look into, the one showing him not his worst, but his most gentle self. And when he collapsed, breathless, Eliara knelt and touched his shoulder, and the glass around him melted into morning light, and the maze became a garden. And as the last glimmer of golden light from the guardian's feather gently faded into Eliara's cloak, like a flame curling into quiet embers, the landscape of the dreamscape shifted once again, not with the urgency of sorrow or the pressure of unresolved fear, but with the steady, solemn breath of time itself preparing to exhale. And in that breath, the threads began to hum differently. Some tugged gently, others coiled nervously, and one in particular, faint as the outline of a forgotten lullaby, pulsed beneath the surface of the dream current, like a heartbeat struggling not to be forgotten. And Eliara followed it, first with a soft step, then with growing urgency, her bare feet making no sound against the silken floors of a dream forged entirely from memory's dust. And before her rose an ancient library not built of stone or wood, but of recollections, each wall made from stacked recollections of moments too small to be remembered in waking life. A child's fleeting grin before a sneeze, a father's hand brushing a daughter's braid one last time before she left for college, the sound of rain tapping against a window, while a heart healed slowly in the dark. And Eliara walked through these aisles of forgotten moments, brushing her fingers across the bindings of lives that had mattered, had been lived, yet whose warmth now drifted aimlessly until someone dared to claim them. And in the center of this grand hush stood a woman dreaming of silence. Not peaceful silence, but the kind filled with unsaid things and walls that grew taller with each withheld word. And this woman's dream was a house of locked rooms, every door marked with a phrase like, "Not now," or "They wouldn't understand," or "It doesn't matter." And Eliara walked through the echoing hallways, hearing the muffled voices behind each door, and she did not force them open. Instead, she sat beside each one, humming softly, and one by one the locks clicked, not from breaking, but from trust, unraveling the bolts. And when the woman finally stepped into the hallway, she was surrounded by every version of herself she had silenced, each one offering her a hand. And as she accepted them, the house transformed into a wide field of wind chimes, where each note carried a truth once hidden, now freed into music. And Eliara wept quietly, not from sorrow, but from witnessing healing bloom in the soil of secrecy. And as she turned to leave, the wind chimes played her name, not the name spoken in waking hours, but the one she was known by in the language of dreams. she who listens without asking, and the dream folded gently behind her, satisfied, while the thread pulled her onward again, this time into a strange stillness, where she found herself in a place where dreams did not flow freely, but clung together in sticky clusters like cobwebs abandoned. These were the dreams of a man who no longer believed sleep could be kind, a poet who had once loved words, but had forgotten how to speak to the stars, and his dreams were tangled with ink blots and faded metaphors, lines scratched out before they could land. And Eliara sat in the middle of this poet's dream journal, holding the quill he had dropped long ago, and with care she wrote not for him, but beside him, crafting a line that simply said, "The moon is not lonely just because it travels alone." And when the poet read it in his dream, his fingers twitched, and from the dark folds of his memory, ink began to flow again, and the metaphors returned, not to fix anything, but to remind him of wonder. And as he dreamed of the page filling again, the night sky in his mind expanded, stars blinking back into place, constellations reshaping themselves around the curve of old longing. And when Eliara left, he whispered her name, not aloud, but into the wind of the dream, and it carried her forward into a place that was not quite a dream, not quite a memory, but a threshold, a bridge between a girl not yet asleep and the fear that kept her so. And here Eliara paused, for this child had never known dreams as gentle, only those shaped by the residue of worry clinging to her from the world. And so Eliara knelt beside her, showing her how to shape clouds from breath, how to draw stars with her fingertips, and together they wove a sleeping nest in the air, soft as the laughter of stuffed animals. And the girl curled into it, not fully asleep yet, but no longer afraid. And Eliara kissed her brow with a blessing of gentle descent, and continued on, ever deeper, ever wider, into a new thread that pulled not with urgency, but with loneliness so profound it echoed across all corners of the dream field. A boy who dreamed only in black and white, whose joy had been stripped by a grief no one had explained to him. And he wandered in gray landscapes, touching colorless flowers, and hearing nothing but the low hum of things left unsaid. And when Eliara arrived, he did not speak. And so the threads of dreaming continued to pull her deeper, not into darkness, but into stillness vast enough to hold lifetimes. And Eliara, wrapped in the warm hush of moon-dusted silence, walked gently across the threshold of another world, not unlike the last, but shaped by a different sorrow. This one tender and recent, the kind that trembles just beneath the skin and makes each breath feel like an apology. And it was here, in the muted forest of withheld tears, that she found the dream of a mother who had forgotten how to rest, whose nights were spent counting breaths that were not her own, whose soul had begun to flicker beneath the weight of vigilance born from love. And in this dream, the trees were hung with hollow lullabies, songs she once sang that now echoed only as echoes, and the ground was stitched with footprints she had not made, small, spiraling, endless, tracing the sleepless patterns of her worried mind. And Eliara did not call to her, but simply stood within the dream, arms open like the night itself. And when the mother finally saw her, she did not ask who Eliara was or why she was there. She simply collapsed into her arms, a gust of wind escaping from her lungs. And in that exhale was every "I'm fine" she had ever uttered while holding back storms. And Eliara held her not to fix, not to solve, but to remind her that she too was allowed to be held. And in the dream, the forest turned softer, leaves turning from ash to velvet, lullabies regaining their melody, the trees beginning to hum with the memories of rest. And the mother, still curled in Eliara's arms, began to dream within the dream, her breath evening out for the first time in years, and a tiny silver flame appeared above her, the mark of a soul finally allowing itself to float. And when Eliara stood again, her cloak now shimmered with that flame, another story sewn into her garment of peace, and the thread tugged onward, not sharply, but with longing, and she followed it into a dreamscape where time did not move forward or back, but circled in quiet spirals, like ripples on water that never ended. And here she found a man adrift inside the memory of a single decision, one he had played out in infinite variations every night since, unable to forgive the version of himself that made it. And his dream was a hall of mirrors, where each reflection showed a different ending, some kinder, some crueler, all impossible now. And he was trapped among them, staring endlessly at what could have been. And Eliara stepped through the mirror without shattering it, stood beside him in one of the versions, and whispered not words of absolution, but simply, "You made the best choice with the light you had." And with that truth, the mirror did not break, but melted into wind, taking the other reflections with it, until all that was left was the man and the weight he had carried too long. And he wept not from pain, but from the sudden lightness of not needing to rewrite his past in order to rest. And as he drifted into the first undisturbed sleep he'd known in decades, Eliara continued, now with her cloak heavier by one more kindness, and her path gently guided by the pulse of another dream, unraveling somewhere in the distance. And this next dream came slowly, like dusk creeping across a quiet lake, and it belonged to an artist who had forgotten how to see, not because her eyes had failed, but because her wonder had dimmed beneath the grind of necessity. And in her dream, the world was all outlines, sketches never finished, colors never chosen, as if her imagination had been left behind in some forgotten attic. And Eliara found her standing before a canvas that would not accept paint, her hands trembling with the fear that maybe it wasn't coming back, that maybe the spark had gone forever. And Eliara took her hand, dipped it into her own dream cloak, and when it emerged, it shimmered with stardust and sea foam, the colors of possibilities not yet dared. And together they touched the canvas, not painting a picture, but letting the dream itself paint them. And in that act, the artist smiled, not because she remembered how to create, but because she remembered how it felt to be moved. And that feeling birthed a sky of golden clouds across her canvas. And she drifted into sleep, with fingers curled around a dream brush, once again willing to dance. And Eliara walked on, not weary, but fuller with every step. For each dream she entered was not a burden, but a song added to a growing chorus, humming gently behind her. And then came the dream she had not expected, her own, long buried, summoned from the deepest part of her soul by the very thread she had been following all along. And in this dream, she was not a guide, but a girl, standing once again beneath the tree of quiet stars, alone, uncertain, still not knowing why she had been chosen to walk the dreams of others. And the tree whispered to her, not in words, but in warmth, in light, in the touch of wind against skin. And as Eliara stepped forward once more into the soft night, her presence barely a whisper upon the dream-woven earth, the threads tugged her gently toward a new current, like a river quietly folding over itself. And in its slow motion pull, she sensed a dream coiled in silence. Not resistance, not pain, but a hush so complete it felt like a lullaby left unsung. And when she arrived, she did not find a person at all, but a house, dreaming in solitude, standing on the edge of a long-forgotten coast, where the sea no longer reached, and the windows blinked softly with memories trapped like old perfume in unopened drawers. And the doors, though closed, pulsed with the loneliness of stories waiting to be heard. And Eliara stepped through, not as intruder, but as witness. And inside she found the echoes of a man who once filled these walls with music, whose fingers once danced across ivory keys like raindrops on water. And now the piano sat untouched, each key weighed down by silence, not from lack of song, but from too many unfinished melodies that never found their endings. And Eliara ran her fingers across the keys, not to play, but to listen. And the chords that emerged were soft, scattered raw, like the breath of someone trying not to cry. And from the shadows emerged the figure of the man, translucent and bowed, not by age but by a grief so deep it had turned him invisible in his own dream. And he looked at her with eyes that had waited decades for someone to see him, truly see him. And Eliara did not speak, did not comfort, but sat beside him on the old bench, and together they pressed the keys, one note at a time, not building a song, but allowing silence to bleed into sound. And with each note, a memory returned, of laughter in sunlit kitchens, of hands that once held his in dance, of pages of sheet music with margins scrawled with hope. And slowly the man took shape again, not because Eliara gave him form, but because the dream allowed him to remember that he once had one. And as the piano played itself into stillness, the house exhaled, a long, sweet release, and the windows glowed golden, like eyes finally waking, and the walls no longer mourned but breathed, and the house dreamed now of visitors yet to come, of music yet to be made, and the man faded peacefully into rest, not because he was forgotten, but because he was finally remembered. And Eliara, her cloak now tinged with the scent of salt and piano wood, stepped outside where the thread had already begun to pull again, not sharply, but patiently, and she followed its gentle tug into a dream coiled within a single moment, a child's first memory of fear, wrapped in a thunderstorm and a room too big, and the child, no older than 5, was curled beneath a blanket that had never quite felt big enough, waiting for lightning to stop counting down his breath. And in the dream, the storm roared endlessly, a loop of wind and flash and distant tremors. And Eliara stepped inside the room without opening any door, simply appearing where the fear needed her most, and sat beside the bed like the hush of rain before dawn. And the child peeked out with eyes that did not yet know trust, but recognized gentleness when it arrived. And she whispered a story, not one of power or bravery, but of a little fox who learned to sleep inside a thundercloud and found it hummed lullabies if you listened closely enough. And as the child listened, the storm outside the window began to soften, its sharpness dulling, the flashes turning warm and quiet like fireflies, and his grip on the blanket loosened, his breath deepening into the rhythms of rest. And by the time the last rumble drifted away, he was sleeping not from exhaustion, but from ease. And Eliara kissed his forehead, not to bless him, but to return what had once been taken. Safety, And with that, the dream dissolved into moonlight, and she rose again, cloak now layered with the color of calm skies after rain. And the thread led her next into a dream unlike any she had ever entered. For this one was not shaped by pain or fear or grief, but by stillness, a gardener's dream, woven of seasons and soil, where every breath was a prayer of waiting. And in this dream, she found a woman sitting beside a tree that had not yet bloomed. And when Eliara sat with her, she realized the woman was not dreaming of blossoms, but of time, of all the moments spent tending what may never flower. The silence between them was long, full, whole, and Eliara did not offer comfort or promise, but simply listened. And in the listening, the tree opened, not with petals, but with breath, and from its limbs fell not fruit or flowers, but tiny lights, the kind only seen in dreams. And the gardener wept not from sadness, but from relief, that someone had seen her patience, and in her tears the earth pulsed with a quiet song that echoed beneath Eliara's feet as she stood again, guided by the thread into dream upon dream. And when the thread stirred again, it was not with urgency, but with a slow breath, like morning unfolding beneath the skin of a long dream. And Eliara, still curled beneath the vast hush of the sky, opened her eyes to the faint shimmer of stars melting into the soft gray of early dawn. Not of the waking world, but of a dream that had forgotten where it began. And as she rose, the cloak of gathered dreams whispering around her ankles, she felt the thread nudge her gently toward a place where even the air seemed hesitant to move, where memory clung like dew on leaves, delicate and unspoken. And there, standing at the edge of a mirrored lake that reflected nothing but silence, she saw a figure with eyes closed, arms open, as if waiting not for someone, but for forgiveness itself. And the thread whispered that this was a dream of regret left unspoken, a sorrow so still it had forgotten how to cry. And Eliara stepped onto the water, not across it, but into it, each step drawing no ripples, each movement echoing with the weight of everything unsaid. And when she reached the dreamer, she did not speak, for words would have shattered the delicate glass of that moment. And instead she reached out, lightly touching the space between their shoulders. And from that single touch, 1,000 memories burst like quiet blossoms. Moments where kindness was withheld, where love was meant but never shown, where time slipped by carrying with it the chances never taken. And the figure trembled not with fear, but with the ache of having held silence for too long. And as Eliara remained beside them, a single tear fell into the lake, and in its gentle landing, the entire surface shimmered with color, not bright, but soft, like old letters found in drawers, like photographs faded by sun. And slowly the dreamer opened their eyes, not to see Eliara, but to see themselves reflected, forgiven. And as the lake began to ripple with release, the figure faded not into loss, but into peace, leaving behind a trail of lilac petals drifting over the water. And Eliara gathered one in her hand, placing it into her cloak's quiet pocket, where it hummed with the gratitude of every apology ever accepted. And the thread then pulled her softly toward a horizon painted with hues not known to waking minds, colors that felt more than they showed. And she followed into a dream where the sky bled with ink and starlight, where a child painted the moon each night in their mind, believing it wouldn't rise unless they did. And this child, sleeping beneath a canopy of impossible trees with leaves shaped like forgotten lullabies, clutched a brush in one hand and a candle in the other, eyes shut tightly as if willing the moon into existence. And Eliara watched as the canvas of the sky waited, unlit, until she knelt beside the child and whispered, "It is already rising." And the child stirred, uncertain, and she offered her hand, guiding their fingers to the sky, where together they painted not just the moon, but stars that blinked with laughter and constellations shaped like stories never told. And in doing so, the child smiled in their sleep, no longer burdened with the weight of the world's light, but knowing they were a part of it nonetheless. And as Eliara stepped back, the dream swirled into twilight and tucked itself away like a page turned in a beloved book. And the thread, ever patient, now hummed with a deeper rhythm, one that pulled her downward, into a dream within a dream, layered like stone upon stone, where a city slept beneath a mountain that never spoke, and the people dreamed not as individuals, but as one. Each thought a thread, each emotion a wave. And Eliara found herself walking through quiet streets made of memory, where every wall remembered laughter. Every bench held the sighs of lovers once young. And as she passed, dreams stirred like mist around her, forming scenes of family dinners once held, of dances beneath rain that never reached the ground, of arguments softened by time into understanding. And from these moments emerged a woman, older than time, younger than grief, who held a lantern of stillness and asked Eliara simply, "Will you carry it onward?" And Eliara nodded, taking the lantern, which weighed nothing but felt like everything. And as she did, the city sighed, like a child falling asleep after a long day. And the ground beneath her feet gave way to clouds, and once more she was rising, now held aloft not by wind, but by the stories she carried, each one glowing softly in the folds of her cloak. And the thread led her into a chamber of night, carved from music, where sound had taken form and built itself into walls that sang with every step she took. And at the center was a figure sitting at a harp made of glass and longing, plucking at strings that shimmered with emotion too pure to be named. And as Eliara approached, the figure looked up, not surprised, not expectant, but ready. And together they played. And just as Eliara let her breath melt into the stillness around her, the stars above began to shift, not in haste, not in brilliance, but like a gentle turning of an ancient page. And the thread tugged softly once more, not from urgency but from the natural unfolding of a story, not yet complete. And she rose from the chair of woven memories, her limbs carrying the ease of one who had slept in the arms of time itself, and the sanctuary of resting dreams faded behind her like morning mist dissolving under the hush of dawn, and the air thickened with the weightless hum of waiting, as though every molecule around her held a question that had never been asked. And Eliara stepped into it without fear, without expectation, for she had learned that dreams were never truly linear, only circular in the ways they looped back with gentler meaning. And as she walked, the landscape bloomed beneath her feet, stone paths unfurling like ribbons beneath each step, flowers blinking awake in shades of emotion she could feel rather than see, some tinged with nostalgia, others with the fragile light of first forgiveness. And as she passed a willow tree whose leaves whispered forgotten names, a small creature emerged from behind its roots, not quite animal, not quite shadow, with eyes wide like unspoken apologies, and a soft tremble in its limbs. And it approached Eliara slowly, as if hoping she'd see it without it needing to explain itself. And she knelt, offering not her hand, but her presence, and the creature melted into her shadow, becoming part of her without disappearing, as if the sadness it embodied could be carried now, safely, gently, and the path grew warmer underfoot, turning toward a valley filled with sleeping statues. Figures curled into themselves, made of dreams too heavy to carry further, and Eliara knew they were not gone, only paused, waiting for someone to remember them kindly, to give them permission to dream again. And as she passed each one, she whispered not names, but moments, laughter shared in kitchens, the feeling of holding hands in winter, the quiet pride in someone's gaze after a long day. And with each whisper, a statue exhaled, just once, releasing its dream like a butterfly that fluttered upward and joined a sky now filled with slow-moving flocks of shimmering memory. And the thread led her to the edge of a sea that did not reflect light, but gathered it. Waves made of murmurs and slow heartbeats, and a boat was waiting there. Not tethered, not anchored, just waiting, as if it had known her long before she'd arrived. And she stepped into it, cloak trailing like smoke behind her, and the boat moved not through water, but through silence, sailing across a sea that hummed with every word, never said aloud, every emotion swallowed out of politeness or fear. And Eliara let her hands drift over the edges, letting them feel the warmth of secrets unburdened, of shame released, of truths once too fragile to speak. And soon the sea narrowed into a river, winding through memories that didn't belong to her, but somehow still knew her name. And children danced on its banks, laughter like chimes, faces aglow with joy, unfiltered by worry. And one child, a girl with hair like wildfire and eyes like rain clouds, pointed at Eliara and whispered, "She's the one who brings light without burning." And the others nodded, not in understanding but in certainty. And they waved as the boat drifted on, carried now not by current, but by hope. And when the river widened again, it did so into a bay where moonlight slept in pockets and hills rose like lullabies frozen in time. And there on the shore stood a circle of dream weavers, old and young, quiet and watchful. And they beckoned her gently, and she stepped from the boat, her feet making no sound, and entered the circle, where the ground pulsed beneath her, not threateningly, but with the heartbeat of something sacred and slow. And the eldest among them handed her a spool of thread, not the one she'd followed, but one born of her own steps, woven from every silence she'd honored, every sorrow she'd softened. And he said, "Now you weave." And though she did not know what that meant, her hands moved instinctively, beginning to pull the thread gently through the air, shaping not fabric, but space, building bridges between fading dreams and rising ones. And from her fingers stretched pathways that led to places yet unseen, and each thread glowed with the quiet brilliance of a story, remembered just in time. And around her, the dream weavers sang, not in words, but in tone, in breath, in pauses that meant more than speech. And the landscape responded, blooming with shapes and symbols that defied logic, but felt true. And the stars overhead began to hum in resonance, recognizing her not as a visitor, but as one of their own. And as Eliara continued to weave, the thread she held began to pulse, not with pressure, but promise, pulling her toward a distant mountain that shimmered like a song. And as Eliara walked onward toward the distant shimmering mountain, the landscape around her began to quiet even further, not with emptiness, but with an expectant hush, like a room before music begins. like a breath held in reverence, and with every step she took, the path beneath her grew softer, not with soil or grass, but with layers of dreams long ago set aside, folded into the fabric of the world by those who had once wished deeply and then forgotten how to believe. And she could feel those wishes now, brushing against her ankles like gentle tides, whispering promises half kept and prayers that had waited patiently beneath centuries of silence. And the mountain loomed larger with every heartbeat, not in an intimidating way, but as a place that had always been part of her journey, waiting patiently until she was ready to approach without fear. And when she reached its base, she found no trail to climb, no staircase etched into the stone, only a door carved into the side, glowing faintly with the light of stars trapped in crystal veins. And as her fingers brushed the surface, the stone warmed and breathed, opening inward not with sound, but with an inhale, as though the mountain itself had been dreaming and was just now waking to welcome her in. And inside the tunnel that yawned before her was not darkness, but a deep silver luminescence, like moonlight passed through the quiet of memory, and she followed it without hesitation, her footsteps echoing not off stone, but into stillness, absorbed as if the walls themselves listened, not to judge, but to remember. And as she walked deeper, the passage widened into a cavern filled with floating lights, each one gently pulsing with the rhythm of someone's deepest rest. Dreams unspoken yet somehow safe here, suspended like soft lanterns of memory. And among them drifted figures, not solid, not ghostly, but shapes of possibility. And they turned toward her, not with eyes, but with awareness, recognizing her not as a stranger, but as one who had chosen to carry the thread of forgotten hopes and unspoken fears. And one of them, shaped like a woman woven from silver mist, drifted forward and placed her hand over Eliara's heart, not to take, but to share. And in that instant, a cascade of feeling bloomed within her. Centuries of longing, loss, peace, discovery, all flowing through her like music returning to its melody. And her eyes closed without command, not from weariness, but from surrender. And when they opened again, she stood in a circular chamber lit from above by a skylight that didn't seem to exist in the stone, only in the memory of stars. And in the center of the chamber lay a pool, so still it could only reflect truth. And she approached, gazing down not to see herself, but to see what rested beneath. And what she found were not images, but moments, echoes of quiet kindnesses, of forgiveness given in whispers, of fears faced alone and overcome without applause. And with each image that surfaced, the pool glowed brighter, not in blinding brilliance, but in a warmth that made her bones hum. And a voice, not hers, but inside her, said softly, "This is what remains when everything else fades." And Eliara knelt by the pool and dipped her fingers into the water, expecting ripples. But instead the pool began to rise, not in waves, but in light, surrounding her in a cocoon of understanding. And suddenly she wasn't in the chamber anymore, but floating above the mountain, above the landscape she had crossed, and she saw it all as it truly was. A tapestry of interconnected dreams, a living mosaic stitched with sorrow and joy alike. And from this height she could see the invisible threads between hearts, between stories, between lifetimes. And she realized the thread she had followed was not just hers, but everyone's. And that she had become a keeper not of dreams, but of their continuity. And the realization settled over her like snowfall, soft and complete. and slowly she descended back into herself, finding her feet once again on solid ground, and the chamber was quiet once more. The pool still, but within her chest the thread pulsed gently, reminding her that the journey was not over, only unfolding further. And as she turned to leave the cavern, the path behind her gently closed, not in secrecy but in completion, and a new path opened before her. This one a garden that stretched endlessly, filled with dream blooms that responded to her passing by, lifting their heads, each petal humming with restfulness and gratitude. And along this path, Eliara saw benches made of time itself, where figures sat in stillness, each lost in a sleep deeper than silence, and beside each one rested a candle that had never gone out, no matter how long it had burned. And as she passed, each candle flickered just a bit brighter, sensing her presence, recognizing the weaver who walked awake through the spaces where only dreams were meant to dwell. And at the heart of the garden stood a tree, not tall,